Hi, I'm a higher ed social media manager, and I have a confession. It gets tiring having to be creative on demand. Ted Harrison, founder and CEO of neuemotion, has a unique take on the creative process, and you are absolutely going to want to stick around for his confession. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager. I'm Li Fowler, award-winning social media professional, author, and podcast host, and a recognized voice across the social media marketing industry. Social media managers are navigating the wild, ever-changing world of higher ed communications, and I'm here to share the real stories and lessons behind the posts. Each episode explores the challenges, strategies, and untold moments that come with running social media accounts in today's digital landscape. Let's get into it. Ted, welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager. I'm very happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Ted, you worked at Twitter when it was actually Twitter. I know you could probably talk about that all day, but can you give us a snippet of how that was, and like what that was like, and how the transition out of Twitter into finding your own agency was like?
Yes, I was there when it was still Twitter, and then I was also there about a year after the acquisition before I was on my way to start neuemotion, our agency. But there's so many things. I got to be a part of a really incredible time, I think, for the platform. One of the things that there's lots of opinions and thoughts from outside looking in, and I liken it to nothing is ever as bad as it seems or as good as it seems, or when you're outside looking in. And I think that that's kind of how I was taking a lot of it. I got to be there whenever Twitter kind of turned profitable for the first time. So it felt like it was a really exciting time for us as a company. That was great. Then there were obviously lots of decisions regarding politics and international conflict. And one story always sticks out to me is I just remember this very clearly that kind of helps encapsulate a little bit of that. It's never as good as you might think from the outside looking in, or never as bad. There was one time I needed approval from pretty high up the chain at the company for something we were trying to do, and we couldn't get a hold of this specific stakeholder for a day or two, and that was rare. We moved very fast at Twitter to not be able to get that. And when finally someone got back to me, it was this person's assistant, and they were like, "Hey, sorry, the exec team is dealing with ISIS trying to be back on the platform." And it was just one of those moments where I just had this oh, right, this platform is so much bigger than just a U.S. political problem or a small, this is a global platform where everyone could communicate. People are trying to mask their identity and get things communicated to operatives who are nefarious actors. And so it's interesting when you think about it that way, in terms of you're ultimately, people want to pin speech and all these different things to being the problem, the platform's problem, when really you're dealing with a lot of human depravity, for lack of a better word, that comes to life on those platforms. And I think it was just, it also made me realize in that moment, it's in one of those moments where you're oh, right, what we do has helped tons of people, but it's also been used for bad. That was a big moment for me while working there.
Was it particularly difficult, transitioning out and starting your own agency, or did you find it helpful?
Yeah, well, I definitely found it tremendously helpful. One thing, so my role there at the company was overseeing all of our advertiser production. And so basically what that meant is people wanted to advertise on Twitter. So they came to my team we were able to create content that would perform really well. And obviously the goal of the company is if they come to our team, it's going to perform well. They're going to want to spend more money and invest it on the platform. So that's kind of why my team existed. And so I think that for me, because of the unique position I was in, I had a lot of front row seats to the agency, creative media and brand, all kind of those different agencies, and then the brand itself, and how that there was interplay, what was working, what wasn't. And obviously, too, was able to develop a lot of really good relationships in terms of just like how to build good social media marketing. I feel like it really prepared me for a ton of success in how we were set up for NeueMotion. And we're almost 2 years into existence. I have a lot of great clients on the roster, and it's been fun to build.
Oh, amazing. Well, congratulations on that. But
Thank you.
It does sound like if they went to your team, to create, there's a lot of content creation happening on your team as well. And which actually brings us to the topic of our conversation beautifully today. But I mean, just being creative, constantly creative. I know that social media managers are constantly under the pressure to be creative, and it's hard, right? And I know that we're looking to each other for inspiration. We're looking for like outside influences, but essentially they're like bursts of creative energy. But you believe that it can be a more deliberate process. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's so funny. I feel like my personal own, like when I have the biggest bursts of a creative inspiration is like when I cannot do anything about it. It's like, oh, I'm like taking care of my child, or I'm making dinner and I need to get dinner.
Yes.
It's like,
totally.
Why can't I match this up in the time that I need it? So I wrote a book called Entrepreneurial Creativity. Mm-hmm. And in that book, I really tried to outline the fact that I actually view the creative process much like the scientific process. It really is. We like to compartmentalize like our creativity. In fact, I think we kind of secretly get a bit of pride when we get to say to someone, "Oh, I just came up with it," as a response.
Yes. Is it true?
Yeah, but exactly. Is it really true? There's probably lots of foundational background and other things that like really led you to the idea. And so what I try to do in the book is ultimately kind of outline like, hey, if you put some processes and start to define them, you can actually kind of get out of the rut of like waiting for those moments of inspiration and instead be able to view your entire life's course or life's work or the work that you're doing as one big creative endeavor. And then it allows you, so like that whole process itself is creative in developing it. And then you get to kind of build on top of that and make sure that you're consistently creative and affording yourself the opportunity to come up with great ideas, even when you're not feeling it, Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the big distinctions that I try to make in the book is ultimately, and really with our team even now, is that creativity doesn't just like kind of bypass us. One way I phrase it is like our work is the result of us and we're not the result of our work. And so we have to put in that work that we can get to that work that then becomes great. And so I think that is a really important thing for us to consider whenever we're trying to just be creative on a consistent basis.
Okay. So on a high level, like I love that. I love that idea, but can you maybe talk us through like how we can apply that day to day, when like day in, day out, we're made to create content, like just on a daily basis. So how do we apply that?
One thing that I like really, in fact, my team, this has become a joke that I quote this so often, but I compare it to J.R.R. Tolkien. His quote is the one that stands out, but J.K. Rowling, C.S. Lewis, George R.R. Martin, every fantasy writer both has initials for names, apparently. And then also they would tell you.
It's so true. I know. It just made me go, wait a second. That
for
is
those
so
listening,
true.
you should have seen Jenny's face.
Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah. And?
Yeah. They would tell you, Tolkien's actual quote is he had to draw the map before he could build the world of Middle Earth. And I think that's a really good foundation for us. And if you think about fantasy authors and people, who created these expansive worlds, even they have to kind of set some rules and boundaries in order to then play within it. Because if you don't have those, you start to miss out. You start to like break the rule. Things don't make sense and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's often the problem with us whenever we're like, I'm just not feeling it today. It's because you've not put any rules around like, how can I focus my time in order to be like this? And so one of the things that we really try to stick to as a company, but also I try to do this myself, is really establish like what rules are working for me and like what I need to accomplish. And I think that sounds like a very boring thing and it's like suppressing creativity. But the reality is if I know I have these guardrails, then it's like I know when I can flex outside of them and I know when I need to stay in them. And at least I have these things consistently, like you're going to continue to find inspiration.
So when you say guardrails, is it kind of like let's be realistic. This is the budget that we're working on. This is sort of like we're thinking of a video, or is that sort of, and then you can play within those boundaries.
Here's a good example of like a rule that I like actually follow. So what I call it like the imperfect distillation method, which is like getting to an idea in a consistent way. So I try to differentiate between concept and idea in the book, and I try to do this day to day as well. And the reason for that is like that they're very similar, and we often use them interchangeably in our day-to-day speech. But I think it's important an important distinction. So a concept actually is something that you just it's just like a thought, whereas an idea is really directed towards a course of action. And so,
and is more concrete.
Is more concrete, exactly. And I think one of the challenges as a creative is like, well, when do I know if I actually have an idea that's like concrete? Basically, this method is like 7 questions to be asking yourself, right? To understand, okay, do I have a real idea that I can take action on? Or is this something I should just kind of like leave for later? Or perhaps figure out how I solve one of these questions if I need to figure that out. So one of the questions in there, and this is why I brought it up, is do I have the resources to get this done?
Oh, okay.
Because I think often, what I think is often actually an excuse to be like, well, we just don't have the budget for it. And I think there's always a way to be like, you know what, like let's get creative with like what we have within our resources. You may not have the budget for it, but if you're in higher ed, for example, you may have access to specific resources that others may not, because there's a bevy of things that are unique to your university.
Or we always have to get creative because we don't have a budget. Like we have to figure out how to take that no and make it a yes, or is this possible and make it a yes. So I'm with you on that one.
Another thing that I think is like particularly helpful in terms of a rule or boundary for like knowing whether I should be executing on this is the question we don't often ask ourselves, which is this scalable? And so I think often some people will be like, well, I'm trying to do a one-of-a-kind thing, so of course it's not scalable. The real point in asking that question is, okay, yes, maybe you're doing a one-time event in this like random, whatever it is that you're going to do, and you're going to do all this like social content around it. But is the playbook for that scalable? Can you take that and apply it to something else? And the reason that I think
Can we repeat it?
Can we repeat, even if it comes with a different outcome, is there something within it that's like, oh, we can pick this up and move it? And the reason for that is I think that we're kidding ourselves if we're really coming up with something entirely novel. We've had thousands of years of human history at this point. And so the idea, it's more about the assembly of like this piece, and then that makes it unique, right? And I think if you can say, hey, this framework or what we're trying to accomplish is scalable, it's giving you another point as you go up to 7 points in this, like asking these questions of like, okay, this is getting more and more like real. And one last like question in that is like, we do try to make sure you can explain the idea concisely. Often it's like, I have a really good idea, but the problem is if you can't explain it in like less than 50 words, it's still something just kind of in your head.
It's probably not concrete. That is that is a great way of saying that.
It's putting some pieces together so that you're like, you can approach every day and be like, I'm going to take 30 minutes every single day and like write out my concepts and start like asking these questions and like getting to a place where that becomes part of your habit. And then that gets you out of the rut, even on days when you're not feeling it.
I actually love that suggestion of the exercise of like asking yourself questions. It's almost like you're becoming your own brainstorming partner, but it's helping you flesh out in a concept you might have. Like, who do I need? What do I want this to look like? Or, I love that. I actually want to go back to that thought that you had, or that thought you shared about you have to create the map in order to see the rest of the story. And I think for me, for the longest time in creation, I used to think in a timeline, like, in a flat line, like step by step by step by step. And I realized that was preventing me from like that was too, narrow of a way to think. And when I started thinking like in a tree, like growing branches, it really helped my creative process or thinking about things. And so the map makes me feel like that's sort of parallel, right? If you have a map, you can grow your concept in different directions, but within the map.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You
Does
don't,
that make sense?
no, totally. You don't want to plant the tree, have it grow, and then all of a sudden you've got it popping up underneath the foundation of your house.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, there
It's
you
still
go.
within
Yes.
the branches or the original tree, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully the listeners are following, but
I am. So,
okay, great,
yeah.
great. It's not totally, totally out there. Okay, so I love this. And I remember the last time that we talked, you used the term entrepreneurial creative. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah. So it really, we kind of, I feel like have been giving the underpinnings of it here throughout the conversation.
Okay.
It's, I think a lot of people, they look at like famous artists throughout history or the filmmakers, and they forget that all of them were commissioned. They were getting paid, the artwork that we see in museums today. I mean, it's not the case every single time. There are the exceptions of like, oh, they became popular after they, passed. Right. But the truth is they were still doing that work for money. And I think it's often, there's a misnomer. Actually, this is like, there's part of the inspiration for writing this book was, there's just a significant portion of people that graduate with like a creative degree of some sort. And I believe the stat, and we might have to correct it in the show notes or something. It's like close to this, but it's only about 20% of people by the time they're 25 are still working a creative job that graduated with a creative degree. And I think that's often a result of a mismatch between, they get into a business setting and they feel like I'm like fish out of water because like they can't speak the language of like, how do you grow a business or what's the objective or what's going on? Or even the same can be true at a university. It's like, well, we got to get tuition or get the enrollment up or whatever the various objectives are. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to like connect the dots between that and being creative. And so what I've outlined, and it's a big realization I've had in my career, is you can be creative and make money. So if you want brass tacks on what I think an entrepreneurial creative is, it's ultimately someone who understands that creativity can have a P&L. It's someone who is applying and like really focused on like, how do I continue to get better? How do I make sure that I'm making the objectives and providing a sustainable life for myself so I can be creative? Because the fact is, Jenny, I mean, how many projects do you have like in the back of your head or in a notebook that you've never like gone to do?
Let's take a quick pause for a word from our sponsor. Southeast Missouri State University needed to launch more targeted campaigns faster, yet they were bogged down by manual campaign builds, slow approvals, and vendor overload. With Element 451, they eliminated 5 vendor tools and gained marketing superpowers in one platform. They saw a 13% increase in applications, processed applications within 2 days, and achieved 33 to 35% email open rates. The impact? Personalized, automated campaigns running at scale without the drag. Ready to turn your next campaign around in hours and not weeks? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents.
Not to make you confess here on the call, but
it's true because my position has evolved so much that I don't know, whatever way you want to say it, I don't get to, or I don't have to, but it's kind of pulled me away from the creative side a little bit. I don't love that, but yes, to say I don't really have a lot of like creative projects that are in the back burner right now.
Yeah. And I think that part of the reason that happens over time is because we're like, okay, one day, or maybe if things change. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm not advocating that like every thing you've ever thought of you should be executing on at all times. But I wanted to put up a system in place that I knew would get you to the result you wanted if you just started from there. And the other thing too that I'm happy to admit is, I wrote this book and it's the ideal version of me. It's not like I sit down and I'm like to a T following this every single time. I think anyone who's ever written a book and says like 100% of the time this is me is probably off base.
Yeah.
But we can take a lot of inspiration from okay, this is what like this could look like, and I think I can start here. And I think that's really what that's about.
But I do really love and appreciate the fact that you say you can make a profession out of being creative, and it doesn't mean like, oh, genius idea every time. It's setting a process for yourself to be creative and succeed at it.
Yes, so exactly.
I love that idea very much. In circling back to social media, none of us can make something go viral, but I have learned that you can design or create with virality in mind. And I feel like your process gives more space and room for this. Would you say that? Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of our customers at NeueMotion are B2B businesses. And I think for us, we're often trying to go viral within a subset of people, right? Like it's like, I actually would rather it go like very much in a small community at times as opposed to like everyone.
Yeah, but I would say a lot of times we're trying to reach a very specific audience, right?
Yeah,
most
for
of
sure.
us are. Yeah.
No, but what I was going to say, for completely. And I think the same principles are applying here. I think that what we forget, and you actually touched on this earlier, I think we forget to ask ourselves questions and start there. And that's really where it started for me in some of this. So I mentioned, my time at Twitter. One of the things that happened there was our ad products were always kind of behind the other platforms. We were always kind of facing off and trying to win media dollars and ad investment from companies who were like, should we advertise on Twitter or should we advertise on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever else? And we didn't have the same level of products, largely because the actual Twitter was a timeline that moved very differently, and there's lots of reasons why. But we had to come into the room with like a different story or a different way of approaching things. But we still had to meet the baseline on like, are we actually grabbing attention the way that we should be and those kinds of things. And one day I'd told enough advertisers like, hey, you have to get attention, that I finally asked myself like, wait, do I know what attention is? Like I know the definition of the word, but I asked myself the question, like, what is attention? Like, what are our brains doing in order to give it? And so I went down a rabbit hole, including the very institution that where you work.
Very
some
good.
MIT research papers, Harvard studies, and like
Love it.
Also kind of comparing it against our own data sets at Twitter. And basically, there's a lot of learnings that we can take away if we just take a moment to ask ourselves a question. Is really what I want to get at there.
So
is like
true.
To really, you don't have to just go to ChatGPT or Claude to like start asking, sparring. You can start with yourself. And I think that for me, it was honestly a pretty sizable moment, I think, for me in terms of just like opening my eyes to the possibilities of like, I can find information anywhere. What was interesting about some of those studies is there's lots of things that our brains are doing in order to give attention. And I think really for marketers or people trying to capture content online, there's like two key components. There's context and there's location. And I kind of visualize them as levers if it's easier to visualize it that way. And it's like, how much do we push the context lever? How much do we push the location lever? Do we pull it back, et cetera? And what's interesting about this is if you think about it, if you woke up every day and every day you woke up, you had to reset your entire existence. You had no context on your own life. You would be in a panic state. Like as a human, you don't understand what's going on in the world around you. That's like, it instigates like fight or flight
Totally.
in your body. And so we are at a base level craving to understand the context of things. And I think that what's often missing in going to create content is making sure that you're like setting the context well. That's both understanding where your content's living. So whether it's on Instagram or LinkedIn, or you're trying to communicate to an audience in Discord even. I know that there's like so many different places that you could go. What's the context that this messaging is going to be showing up in? How can I provide context about why this even matters to you? quickly, you know? That's the thing that's like, I often think of this, like some of these things are already like well prescribed in like other way. People say, well, have a great hook. Well, a great hook either provides context or it's intentionally leaving context out. So you have to find out more,
That's a great way to explain that. Yeah.
And I think in our heads we like get to like, okay, I got to come up with a hook. But if you start to get to the intrinsic, like what's the human brain trying to do, then you can get to more creative and fun answers. And then on the other end, you have the location, and that's like we want to make sense of the world around us, like things like it's why we like Wes Anderson films, because it's like I know exactly where to look on the screen because everything is so like pristine. Whenever you start to use those in concert, you can start to think about how you are going to get that attention. And then beyond that, there's obviously lots that you can do. I think that the things that really like go viral, and I think especially in contexts like higher ed or in B2B marketing, are the things that really touching on true human experience or human insight. It's thinking through, what am I going to do to reach the person that I'm actually trying to reach in a way that makes them feel heard, seen, all of those things. And then you start to layer in like how you structure that. And then, by the way, I'm sure you know this, our attention spans are terrible. But Jenny, one of my favorite studies things that I've read is there's this New York Times article from 1985 that was lamenting how bad our attention spans were. And it was 1985, and we cratered off a cliff. It was like blaming TV and like other. It was like, hey, we're getting to where our attention spans aren't great. And meanwhile, I think that the author would probably be like, can we go back to just 1985?
Yeah, 1985.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because of that, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing in content, especially if we're trying to get that reach that we're looking for, go viral, however you want to frame it, it's ultimately, am I like kind of reinserting that every 3 to 5 to 7 seconds, right? Like, how am I re-engaging those same things, not just at the beginning, but throughout? We have to continue to provide context or leave it out, or, however you want to push or pull that lever, and make sure that we're putting things in interesting places. One thing that's interesting to me, Jenny, we did this at Twitter. We just did a baseline test about if we moved captions around, like what does the percentage, like how much longer do people view? It's like 28% longer, just not having them in the same spot every single time. Like we were getting longer views just by, okay, these words are here, and then next batch of words were up in the top corner and kind of moving things around. And that's because like we're just kind of following along with our eyes, and it's re-engaging our attention. So it's just that's a very tactical answer to that.
Does your audience not get like annoyed with you by doing that?
No.
It actually keeps them engaged longer.
Yeah, we saw 28% longer view times. Yeah.
That is interesting. I love so much of what you just said, and it just made me chuckle a little bit because you were like, we should ask ourselves questions, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should Jenny GPT. I should sit here and go, what do I mean by attention? What gets my attention? It just kind of got me thinking in that space. Yeah. Like you should ask yourself first, right? And
yes.
I love that idea about like context, and because there's so many other ways people say it. People probably say things like, that's what's relatable, that's what's familiar, but it all has to do with the context,
yes.
and knowing where your audience is at that time. So location. So I love that unique way of looking at that. So thank you for that.
Well, really, I should be thanking you because MIT is where I found a lot of this information.
Oh, no. I mean, there is a lot of case studies and open courseware that is available out there from MIT. So, we should all tap into it.
Absolutely.
Listening to you, it sounds like you believe that creativity can be a learned skill.
Yes, 100%. I actually love the summation there. The truth is, I believe that every person, even the person who's going to tell you, I'm just the numbers, girl or numbers guy, there's creativity in there. And I think it's part of the human experience. I think to not participate in creative endeavors is to miss out on a big part of life. I'm pretty passionate about this because I just think that, I feel very fortunate and lucky that as part of what I get to do for a living is I get to point to tangible things that like I and me and my team and, our clients make. It's like, here's a piece of content, here's a video. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people are in roles and in jobs where they don't get to do that. It's like a Everything is ongoing. There's never like here's a thing I made. And I really think that as social media managers, there's often like you get to make things. And so for me, I think this is another way to reframe, like when you're in a rut, it's like, hey, I get to actually create things for a living instead of thinking all the time about, like, oh, I got to do this again and again and again. But hey, what if we reframed that? Like, hey, this is an opportunity and I'm fortunate to get to do this. And I do think it's a learned skill. I think that anyone can learn it. I think that people can get more creative over time. And I also believe, there are like tests that you can take that supposedly measure your creative ability, And what's interesting to me is like, the tests are great. I think it's like a good way. There's some really good ways to test that, to see like what your ability is to like piece together two like disconnected things and like all those things that you might do in a test like that. But the reality is someone who's like not creative on that score, if they've made something, I would say they're more creative because I think, like you got to get to your output at some point. And if you're not ever focused on that, then you just are kind of sitting on a bevy of ideas that never get made.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thinking. Can you remind us what your book is called, or the title of it again? And is it available everywhere?
Yeah, it's available. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. It's probably the best way to go about it. It's Entrepreneurial Creativity, Repeatable Creative Success.
Okay, love it. And I can't let you go without asking you, Ted, what is your confession?
Okay, I'm going to give a big one for you here. So I told you I was there a year after the acquisition at Twitter, after it became X. Our team was responsible, and some of those people are on the neuemotion team now, for the death of Larry the Bird, or the logo. So, yeah.
Oh, wait a second. I was just today years old when I learned it had a name. It was Larry?
Yeah. I mean, it was Larry Bird, like after the, it was internally a joke, and then it wasn't like a well-known thing, but it was public that the name for the bird was Larry. I didn't even
know that. Okay, well, so one, that's a big bombshell.
Yeah, there's a reveal. Yeah.
And then two, wait a second. Do you mean you physically like took off the bird profile, like the everywhere, and put the X up?
So the story goes, there was some user who had tweeted at Elon to say that this is what the logo should be whenever he decided he was naming it X. And then because my team was still around and could like make things in Illustrator and in software, we recreated it so it wasn't this like little tiny PNG that had gotten sent in, but it's the X you see everywhere. So every time I see it, I'm like, yep, I remember when that was made. And none of us wanted to do it.
So were you the person that like pressed
No,
send
if you want the real story, I was at a concert in Wyoming with almost no service, getting texted that Elon wanted to project this on the side of a building in less than an hour. Oh, and I was barely getting service because I'm in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, at a concert.
Didn't that happen? That happened in New York City, right?
And so I got someone else on my team because I just added a bunch of people to a group text and was like, hey, can you take care of this? And I'm not going to out her specifically on this call.
But you were part of that too. That is insane to me. Okay. But that eventually got taken down.
Yeah, there's a number of issues with it. But yeah. But we did get it done in that time frame. But it was definitely like the retro on that was, well, that was interesting and not fun.
Oh, R.I.P. Larry. Was that one of the hardest things you had to do while you were there?
There were plenty of hard things, there was a number of moments, for anyone looking at it, trying to look at it objectively, like Elon's big thing is, first principles thinking and trying to, redo everything. And I felt like often we were stuck in first principles thinking on things that had already been, done. Yeah, exactly. And so I felt like there was lots of fire drills to like maintain or keep or change something like slightly that I felt like were definitely just like caused a lot of swirl and a lot of work. So there was plenty of like challenging moments. That was definitely like, it was like sad to feel like our team was like a part of the bird going away.
That was definitely sort of a closing of a chapter.
And it was like, I was gone a couple months later. So it's not like I was around for that much longer.
Well, there you go. Wow. You heard it here, everyone.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Wow. I love that. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Ted, because that I will remember for probably the rest of my days.
I'm sorry to everyone who's listening.
No, thank you for your time. It was great. I loved this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.